Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Chair, for the introduction. So today I'll be speaking on the psychology of leadership development. And in trying to align the title of my abstract with our conference theme, I landed on this: humanizing students' leadership learning experience by centering their development needs through applied psychology. So for me, lecturing is a collaborative problem-solving activity. It's typically, as I see it, me pairing together with my students to solve their leadership development needs. So psychological safety typifies my learning environment, and I try by all means to build rapport with my students. I also try to sprinkle in some humor into the work that I do. So in terms of psychological safety, I always encourage my students to speak up. They are free to present themselves as they are. They are free to question information that is being shared. They are free to make mistakes, and they're also free to ask for help. All of those things are allowed in my sessions. I use applied psychology for maximum impact. And what this means is that I employ psychological methods and psychological research to inform the problem-solving activities. So as mentioned, I am the course lead for the Leadership Quest module. This is a module in our newly launched MBA in Healthcare Leadership. And then I also teach career management, MBA career management. Now, my approach as an organizational psychologist, operating in the context of leadership development, is to empower employees. So that is your leaders, your directors, your managers, by allowing them to understand what is happening to them and what happens around them in their organizational context. And in terms of my teaching and my learning approach, it is assessed quarterly through our lecturer evaluations. Now, part of my approach is centering students' needs and their experiences. I apply a Rogerian therapeutic approach. You may have heard of that. It has to do with person-centered therapy. So whilst I, encourage my students to introspect, I encourage my students to self-explore, I extend this model slightly. Rogerian therapeutic approach is non-directive. So as a psychologist, you create an environment of empathy, an environment of acceptance, an environment of respect for your client, and that is what I produce for my students. But I take it a step forward because I have to direct learning. I can't just leave it all up to them. And I help to interpret their workplace experiences, and then I'm also able to clarify any misperceptions that they may have. So for an example, I had a student who, would mention, she said, Doc, I really struggle with presentations. Presentations are a large part of my job description, but my confidence is very, very low. And then I said to the student, I said, well, what about self-efficacy? Do you know what that is? And then she said, no. So I had to just say to her, maybe having an idea of yourself as being low in confidence in terms of presentations is not the right way to go. You need to understand what self-efficacy is because there's an experiential component tied to it. Anyone can be confident without ever having had exposure to an activity, without ever having mastered an activity. So that is an unhelpful concept in this regard with regard to this particular student. I said, look at the presentations. It's part of your job description. You've done it before. So you're not operating from a baseless standpoint. All you need to do is improve on what you actually do. So in that case, I was able to empower the student by breaking up the two concepts. Another student mentioned, we were having a discussion, and she said, Doc, in my workplace, I have a work personality. And then I have a completely different personality when I leave the workplace. And then, I had to clarify to say, a personality doesn't split. It doesn't fragment unless you're unhealthy. And so, a lot of people have this misperception that I'm like this and I'm like that, but that's not the truth. It just so happens that certain environments activate certain parts of your personality, such that you'd be inhibited maybe in one department. But if you were to move to a different department in the same organization, you might have a different experience. So those are some of the things that I need to clarify and help my student with. Then I pair their self-awareness with ways to combat stresses. Now, you know that we're dealing with a bunny world. Usually people talk about the VUCA world. Now we're talking about bunny. It is a brittle environment. It's an environment characterized by anxiety. The world is non-linear. It's incomprehensible. It's changing all the time. Now, we are dealing with leadership development, and leaders aren't immune to stress. This is what I find with the leaders that I train. And so one of the problems that they volunteered is decision making, and especially in a pressured setting. So you'd find that you need to release a statement as a leader. People are looking to you for direction, or maybe you'd need to, inform the organization of something in a formal way. You don't have time, but you need to produce something that is sensible. And so what I do, I give them little tips and tricks. So for that decision making, I always say you start with a statement, or it could be a claim. The second part is that you need to back up that statement or claim with a reason. And then the third part is to tie it all together with a piece of evidence. So obviously, if you have more time as a leader, your argument would be more cogent, it would be better developed. But if you don't have time and you need to organize your thoughts, lean onto the trifecta. So I found that helps my students. Then for me, and typically I've also found for my students, they need to tackle dysfunction. And so in this sense, I always emphasize precision in the definition and holistic perception of concepts, of behaviors, of phenomena in the organization. And I always say it is so important for leadership credibility that my leaders learn to use words with weight. It's very important. So here, for example, I'd ask my students, do you know, you're a leader, you're an MBA, the difference between microaggression and passive aggression? Do you know this? Not everybody knows it. Why do I want to make the distinction? Because if you know the features of these behaviors, then you're able to see them around you. This is happening to my subordinates, or maybe this is happening to me. So just to take you through it, microaggression, there's an in-group and there's an out-group factor attendant to that. So in the work setting, you might have a team, and you find that in a specific team, one person is isolated. Why? Because everybody else is speaking a language that they don't understand. That is exclusionary behavior, and that is intentional. That's microaggression. Versus someone who is non-confrontational, but would love to demonstrate their dissatisfaction with you in a roundabout way. That is passive aggression. So I say to my guys, have you seen this happen? And people are able to confirm that, yes, we've seen this happen. These are different behaviors. We're able to separate the two, and we've seen it happen to others, and we've also been victims of it. So this is when I say it is very important for people to perceive concepts, constructs, and behavior accurately so that they can tackle them and deal with them. I introduce dialecticism as a mindset to tackle problems. So this has to do with being able to take different kinds of information that is conflicting or divergent information, and being able to appreciate that information without being overwhelmed. It's very important for a leader that flexibility of thought is key. So in humanizing the learning experience for my students, I introduce the concept of hope, and I've taken this one from Corrigan and Schutt. So here they say that hope is a pairing between pathways thinking and agency. You know that agency is influence. Can I influence my surroundings? And then pathways thinking basically describes the process of being able to wiggle out of a sticky situation. How many routes can you discover or can you land on to escape from a problematic situation? So I love this definition because it's detailed and it's also empowering to my students. Communication is also a big part of my leadership training. So this is where I introduce my students to transactional analysis, where we trace people's dominant ego states, the parent, the adult, the child ego state. We look at communication behavioral patterns as well. And then I introduce them to the idea of inner voice, which is a helpful internal narrative versus chatter. So that is where your mind could be mired with negative thinking, just negative self-talk that can drag you down as a leader. Then moving to self-disclosure, I use this strategically to invite conversation from my students. Humanizing the learning process involves sharing personal experiences, and this activates class participation, I have found. So an example here is live scripts. When I start my leadership lessons, I start with communication at the executive level. So this is transactional analysis. And one of the concepts there is a life script. So this has to do with your perception of the world as a child when you grow up. It's colored by your experiences. So my life script I'd always share with my students was that I had a very difficult childhood insofar as I was very, very anxious. And my anxiety was rooted in the fact that a lot of people in my family died. And within our community, our close community. Now, in the African culture, the death is associated with a lot of rituals, there's family gatherings, it's church, it's all of these things. And it was extremely heavy. I didn't understand as a 6-year-old, why do African parents love funerals so much? It's a huge thing. It's too much, And I narrated this to my students and everyone started laughing. And so I said, guys, why are you laughing? It's not funny. And they said, because it's very true. So through that demonstration, through that self-disclosure, I was able to open up, not a can of worms, but a conversation, a meaningful conversation, and get things going. Now, I contain my self-disclosure according to research insights. There's something interesting. I've just put the reference at the bottom. It's research by Rees and Orach. And what they did was looking at self-disclosure. So reciprocal self-disclosures, I tell you something about myself and you do the same. Now they say, long story short, that people don't like when mutually self-disclosing, people don't like to hear that your story is less tragic than theirs. So basically, people would like to know, if you both have bad stories to tell, that yours is always worse. So it's a misery loves company kind of a situation, whilst they don't want you to outshine them in terms of positive stories. Okay, you can do well, but not better than me. So that is a piece of research that has come out, and I'm always mindful of that when sharing self-disclosures. Then self-love and celebration. These things characterize my learning environment. I try to build my students' confidence. I tackle thorny issues of personal significance to my students. I allow them to unpack them in the classroom setting. So, for example, we deal with diversity management as a theme in organizations within the South African context, for example. And I introduced the issue of gradualism. So this is your African leaders, your African young professionals with leadership potential, very good performance, who are frozen in a role. They are not allowed to advance to leadership positions, but they're not given a cogent reason why. So someone would say, no, you still need about a year and a half to refine X and Y behavior. And then at that point, we can consider your leadership development or your ascension to the next level. So the goalpost keeps on moving. We talk about things like that. Another student brought up the idea that in her organization, I think it's a multinational, they use implicit association tests. So again, to the theme of diversity management, these tests are supposed to pick up your prejudice. So whether you are homophobic, maybe you're racist, maybe you are misogynistic, whatever the case may be. The issue here, and this is what I talk to my MBAs about, is that we are trying different ways to invite diversity and inclusion in our organizations. We have a history as South Africa, we all know the history, but, is it worth it, leaders, for you to allow your organizations to pour loads and loads of money into tests like your implicit association tests? Because the question being, if I know about my levels of prejudice, that might not necessarily change my behavior. If I'm a racist, I'm a racist. I just know not to do it in the workplace. If I'm homophobic, that's who I am, but I'm hyper aware of my context and I know where not to do it. So is it helpful behavior as a leader? Is it a strategic behavior as a leader to actually spill money into those kinds of activities? So we have those kinds of discussions. Leadership credibility is important. So introspection is one thing that I lean on. Leadership brand equity development. How do you develop an emotional connection with your followers, get them on board with you? We talk about that as well. And then I try to encourage and affirm participation. So given that feelings of insignificance can be linked to behavioral outcomes, if people don't feel happy, there could be, a negative deviant behavior in the organization. A person could quit, other people spread rumors, there could be vandalism, all of those things could come up. So I typically invite recluse students to share their views, and I always make sure that I complement their views, showing the significance and tying it to the discussions in class at that time. For students who are soft-spoken, like I had a very soft-spoken student this year. He is very intelligent, it's obvious. He's able to build on the ideas of his colleagues. He makes interesting connections, and is able to contextualize the information that I share to his workplace experiences. But his tone, his voice register is very, very low. I had to say to him, you know what, you need to pick up your voice. And I said, because the problem is you articulate your ideas so well, but if your voice hits the floor, someone is going to hear it. Someone who is not as well versed as you, they're going to paraphrase it loud enough for it to land on the ears of people who matter. So this is in the boardrooms, okay, and get the attention of people. And then you will kick yourself to say, you know what, someone has stolen my idea. So I always raise these issues and I show the problem with persisting in that behavior. And then I also get the class to advise, what would you do? What do you do? So it's information sharing. And I think just to shut it down here, to close off, the implication of psychological based or science-based, evidence-based teaching is a learning experience that targets the individual's needs, so at the individual level within a group setting. Thank you. This is the end of my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you, Lehlohonolo. There's just a comment, Tanya.
Sure.
Say something.
Okay, Lehlohonolo, thank you so much. I actually only came in after you started from another meeting, but was immediately gripped, about something that jumped out, from what you said in terms of, the finding a balance between, a mutual vulnerability, that's not competing. And takes away from, what you actually want to achieve, which is a sense of unity and universality. If you also think about your LOMS principles, in group togetherness. But so So the reading that I touched, and it's only for your consideration, is a framework actually that was conceptualized by the previous Institute for Reconciliation and Social Justice at the UFS, which Professor Keat refers to as shared complicity and mutual vulnerability. So I've attached the link, and just because it seems like, and I hope I didn't infer incorrectly, but it seems like much of your work also touch on, or maybe quite embody the whole notion of social justice, in learning and teaching. So so that's just my little penny in the pond.
No, thank you so much, Tanya. I'm going to catch that reference and check out that framework. Thank you.
And then I have a comment. I think for me, it was just thank you for demonstrating how focusing on your students' needs and experiences enhances the learning process. And also what stuck out for me was that introduction of the concept of hope and just linking the thinking and the agency and making the learning experience more humanizing and engaging. So yeah, that's what stuck out for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So yeah, are there any further comments and questions? But I think if there's further comments or questions, you're more than welcome to also populate on the Padlet link as the day goes by. And yeah, I think that's all. So yeah, thank you so much, Doc, for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, colleagues.